officially start. Okay, so welcome everybody. Welcome to our live interview session, and a special welcome, of course, to our two guests. May I ask you to switch off your mics so that we don't have any interference? Thank you so much. A special welcome to Livesay and Alis Anagnostakis, our two guests today for our Conscious You live interview. Thanks for being here. I will introduce you in a second, but Alis usually lives in Australia, but has dialed in from Doha in Qatar today, where it is, I think, around about 5 p.m. in the afternoon. You have already done some work today with clients. Whereas Val, you're currently in Southern California. Is that true? And
That's
you
true.
had to get up really early to join us. Thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for making this possible today. And once again, how amazing that we have the possibility to meet such wonderful people like you, despite large distances, despite different time zones. And I think sometimes we just don't appreciate this enough. And I'm really glad that you're here. This is a conversation about adult development. This is a conversation. I just checked if the recording works because I'm really nervous, as you can see. About education, about parenting, about relationships, and probably about much more. We will see. And there will be time for questions after this short interview, which is good because I can rely on all our guests, and my limited perspective won't matter that much anymore. So I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. But allow me to make a few introductory remarks. As you already noticed, this session is being recorded, and the transcript, as well as the recording itself, will be made available to you, to the Conscious Tribe community, and to the people who are participating today as soon as possible. So again, good morning and good afternoon to all of you. And maybe you want to share where you're from in the chat so that we get an idea where you're from. And if you find the energy, maybe you will add a number to the place where you're from, a number from 1 to 100, talking about your energy level today, because I think we need to get this in the room as well, what our energy levels are. We will do this live probably. I start with the early riser this morning. Val, what would you say from 1 to 100?
I'm pretty energetic this morning, actually. I'd say probably 88.
It's good. Alice.
I'm at about 60, but going up.
60 going up, and I'd say 75 going down, but I think you will help me with this call that it's going up again. Denmark is pretty strong. France is 101. Well, I mean, what else can you expect? Beautiful. Thank you so much. And I'm introducing our two guests, of course, in a bit more detail. I can't get into all the details because we only have like a limited time. So Alis, Dr. Alis Anagnostakis is a researcher, a long-time facilitator, an executive coach who's working with leaders, with teams and companies on at least 2 continents, supporting them on their journeys of personal and organizational evolution. And you have a master's degree in positive leadership and in strategy, and you completed your PhD exploring transformative learning and leaders' vertical development. We will dive a bit deeper into that in a minute. And you're the founder of the Vertical Development Institute. And as I already said, you live on the Sunshine Coast in Australia, usually when you're not traveling, with your daughter, your husband, and a dog with the beautiful name Otto. That's what I read. Valerie Livesay, PhD, is a distinguished expert in leadership development. Great to have you. And organizational transformation. You're the author of the book, Leaving the Ghost Light Burning, Illuminating Fallback in Embrace of the Fullness of You. And we will talk about fallbacks and illuminating and everything else today. Val earned her master's degree in nonprofit leadership and management and the PhD in leadership studies With the Ghostlight framework, she developed a methodology to accompany individuals and teams as they enter a virtuous cycle of increased self and other awareness. She lives in Southern California with her husband and 2 children who are aged 10 and 14, I guess. That's what I remember. Now let's dive right into our topic today. Growing Humans. That was the title of our session. That's the title of your initiative and your big project. You've been working on this for quite some time, and you've been launching it and making it available just recently. And Growing Humans was, and I quote from your website, born out of our shared dream of creating a self-learning space for all adults who play a role in raising or educating children. Now, when I think about it, this sounds like a pretty big audience, a big target group, when we postulate that it needs more than just parents and teachers to raise children. You all remember the proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. That immediately comes to mind. And maybe it's a global village even, because we live in hypermodern and very connected times and environments. So my first question, eventually, finally, what brought you two into this space? What led the two of you to co-create the Growing Humans initiative? And thanks for letting people in.
Alice, I'm going to turn this over to you, actually, because you initiated, you came up with the idea.
Oh, thank you. I think it's very much a co-created thing. But before anything, thank you for having us, Robert, and thank you all for making time for this conversation. I'm actually very curious to see what we co-create in this space together. The short story is that both Val and I have met as I reached out to her as a researcher mentor for me when I was doing my PhD. And we clicked as human beings right away, and then we became good friends. And as we walked in this friendship together, we started obviously to share our experiences beyond just the leadership space where both of us were so active, and in this parenting space where both of us saw our fallback happening so much. So this has been a long coming conversation, but the Growing Humans idea was born out of this realization that I love that sweet voice
Love
in the
that
background.
younger sounds over here. Maybe we could you
there you go. That's it. That's what I'm talking about.
That's beautiful. We didn't plan this though.
I had poured some
but it's perfect.
oat milk in it, but you can still use it.
Utilizing, yes. But definitely for me, motherhood is the place where I find my biggest growth edge. And alongside my relationship with my husband, I think those two spaces are harder than work in many, many ways, or the work is harder. So we started to talk about this more and more. And we also talked about how as a parent, you receive so much advice, and this parenting field is just blooming. And I think that's an amazing thing. And at the same time, a lot of this advice is behavioral. And I, for one, noticed that there is a gap between what I know I should do and what I'm actually able to do, especially when I'm super triggered. So that was the birthplace of, can we actually look at what it takes for us to grow as adults so we're able to embody those wise behaviors with our kids? Yeah. So Val, I'll pass it on to you from here to continue that story. And maybe answer also the question why the umbrella is so big, why this is not just for parents, and it was a very deliberate decision.
So I just want to, that's beautiful. I want to also note that to your point, Robert, about this amazing thing that we can be together in relationship all around across the world. Alice and I have actually never met in person, and we're the closest of friends and companions in this space. And so it just really is a gift that we have this opportunity to be together in this way. without being together physically, though I'm looking very much forward to that. The other thing that I just wanted to add to this is the community aspect of this. And so maybe this also speaks to why parents, why educators more broadly. We found that we grew in community, we develop in community, and that this parenting gig has been one of the single most powerful catalysts for our own development. And it's because we have the tools that we have and the companionship that we have from our study of adult development and our knowledge of child development, which is much less than our knowledge of adult development, that has really helped this be a developmental endeavor for us, growing other humans. And I always have had this philosophy that growing humans is the hardest job that I will ever have, and the most important. And Alis has this great saying, tagline about how grown-ups grow up. And so this was kind of the idea for the growing humans terminology, that we are growing humans, but this is how are we growing ourselves? How do grown-ups grow up in the context of growing other humans? And it's so clear to us that in these communities of fellow parents, fellow journeymen just on the path of development, teachers have been such a powerful educator for us in how we grow our own children. I remember preschool being such a schooling for me and how to be in relationship with my children. And I still use one of the lines that I got in preschool from one of the teachers, which is, do you need a hug or do you need to be left alone? And that works for adults and children alike, by the way. But there's so much wisdom there, and also just the complexity of these roles, right? That is ever increasing. I mean, just in the last 5 years, our teachers are called on to be so much more than I imagine they ever signed up to be. I think the parenting role is incredibly different now than it was in my generation growing up, in the generation before. And so these roles are calling on us to have kind of a bigger mind, more capacities, not just kind of you do this happens and then you do this, but how can I take on more perspective? How can I be more conscious of where I am in relationship to me and the world and my children and where they are? And how can I respond with greater wisdom? And I say all that, and that is the ideal pie in the sky. And then there's the reality of the thing that I study, which is all the times that we're not. And how does that play into our parenting and our capacity to grow our children, but also to raise ourselves in the process?
Thank you so much for your remarks. There was so much in it, and I tried taking notes and then I stopped it because it's too much, and I mean that in a very positive way. But what resonated with me was, on the one hand, this kind of overwhelming experience depending on your own capacity as parents, because sometimes you're just, you don't definitely need a hug and being left alone at the same time, to quote what you just said. And you talked about parents and teachers, and when I think of teachers, then I think of a very professional group. They underwent a lot of training, while we as parents, from us, it is expected to be experts at least the day our children are being born, and then we are expected to be there and to be kind of qualified. And sometimes I had the impression that we expect from ourselves to grow until that point and then to perform our duties as parents. But you have developed you did a lot of research in the area of vertical development. Could you maybe elaborate a bit more about that? Because I think it is important in order to fully understand the concept that is behind growing humans. What is vertical development, and how does it matter for parents and for educators and many others, I guess?
There's something that strikes me when you say, you know, educators have been prepared, whereas us parents have not. There's an interesting thing that I'm learning. I've been privileged to work with teachers and leaders in school systems and in this vertical development context. And many of them are saying, look, we rarely talk about us in the context of our preparation as educators. So that self-reflection, I think there's opportunity there for them just as much as it is for us in the role of parents. I know that both Val and I have our own way of explaining vertical development, but maybe I'll just share my 1-minute version. For me, vertical development is describing how the how of our thinking, feeling, and engaging with the world changes and shifts as we mature. As opposed to the what we know. So it's very much about our lenses, our mindsets, our capacity to take perspective, to manage and understand our own and others' emotions. All of those intangibles that you don't really learn from books, you learn the hard way from personal experience. And most often without any kind of map, you kind of figure it out. Whereas the what we know seems to be, which we call in our field the horizontal development as a complement of the vertical. There is so much more structure in the what. We have formal schooling system, we've got professional development programs, we've got personal development programs, and a lot of them are focused on the what, to enhance the contents of our knowledge. But the how piece is still, I feel, very blurry, hard to articulate. And also, and while being hard to articulate, so crucial to how we show up as human beings. So I may know that I need to be patient when my child is in midst of a tantrum. That's no big deal to learn that. But to be able to manage my own emotional overwhelm in that moment and really, really create that space inside of me to then show up with maturity, that's a function of my vertical development. And it's not dependent on how much knowledge I hold about the best practices of parenting in those contexts. So that's...
I love that, because it creates space for parents and at the same time shows us in which of the areas we need to kind of develop more, because everybody is in this linear path of problem solution, something you can write down, something clear and non-redundant. And you described it perfectly with blurry, because, you know, sometimes you grow and you don't realize that this is a moment of growth because you think it's a moment of failure. And I guess you come across these incidents quite a lot. Val, would you like to add something to what Alis has just described to us as this path of vertical development?
I think that she describes it beautifully. I actually love listening to Alis talk about vertical development. The only thing that I would contribute here is we do all have some familiarity with child development, and we know kids go through stages. They kind of go at their own paces. This is somewhat what it looks like, and then the prevailing wisdom in the developmental field was that this was about 50 years ago, once you stopped growing physically, you stopped growing, like your capacity stopped growing to change, I guess. And so this field of adult development, which is vertical development, what we both have studied, is the expansion of that, exploring how we can continue to grow and change over time. It just doesn't happen as automatically as it does in childhood, and it often needs to be a choice, or sometimes it's not a choice, as you point out, Robert, that it's just a painful experience of failure. Absolutely. That may allow us to grow bigger, and it also may have us constrict and just kind of stay in this space. So this vertical development in adulthood, it is built upon these child development stages, and a lot of people who are who are adults still make meaning often from these stages that that many children do. And I say children, I mean adolescents and ongoing. But just to tie that in.
Yeah, thank you. And I would like to continue this with you, Val, because I just remembered when I was preparing for our session today, I remember the workshop I was once in on diversity inclusion. I remember, and we were having a conversation about pronouns and how to properly address all kinds of groups and members of groups. And one of the participants replied, she said, I identify as tired. And that kind of summed it up, like us all being beyond capacity from time to time. And we know that some people have more challenges than others. So it's a very heterogeneous point of view. But parenting somehow unites us in our struggles, doesn't it? It's how do we make peace with our parental shortcomings? And I leave it to you whether you give us a verbal hug right now or leave me alone with my question to stay, to put
I
it like
haven't
this.
made peace with mine, Robert. So I don't know what you're talking about.
That's a very comforting answer already. Thank you. So how do you make peace with your shortcomings? Because you said you haven't made peace, but is there a strategy you have? How can your expertise, your experience, your research in that field help you? And I know, Val, that you have done a lot of work around the concept of fallbacks, which is, when you give us a short introduction, it also resonates with a lot of us, of course. Maybe you can elaborate a bit on that.
Sure. Gosh, where to start? That's a lot, Robert.
Take your time.
I'm not going to take notes on that, so remind me if I miss something. Okay, so I have done a lot of study around fallback, and it's because I find myself in fallback often, especially as a parent, and I wanted to figure out what this is all about. And what it is when we have a set of capacities, we are developmentally capable of showing up with an ability to take on complexity and see different perspectives and regulate ourselves emotionally and have a degree of consciousness about ourselves and others. And then we don't. We all of a sudden show up smaller, more constricted, with no options that we had just a moment before. We know that we had options. We know that we can't get them at the time. And that happens for me often in my parenting. So I don't have it figured out. So I'm joining the don't have that figured out. Like it's a practice. So that's my answer to your question. Like, how do you do this? It's a practice. What does it give you? It gives you a practice, and it reminds you that you're in the practice, and you can also be in the practice in the presence of your children, which I think is really important because we often, I tell my kids, you need to practice your dribbling for soccer or football, depending on where you are in the world. You need to practice your handwriting. You need to practice your multiplication facts. And we're always telling them you need to practice. And I remember having a sense of my parents being done, like they just figured it out. They hit a certain age and they had it all figured out, and they didn't do much to disillusion or they weren't saying, oh no, we don't have it all figured out. And it is, I think, really helpful for our children to see that we are also forevermore in the practice of something. We may have mastered our multiplication facts, but we haven't mastered this business of being human and showing up in alignment with our intentions. And that's also something that we're inviting them, that very same thing, we're inviting them into the practice of. So how wonderful to be in the practice with them and to be able to say, I am doing my best and I'm trying to hit the mark. And sometimes I'm going to miss the mark, and it gives me an opportunity to try again. So that's what it gives me, I think, an ability, an awareness actually of all the times that I'm not who I like to believe that I am or who I want the world to see. But to really see myself in my full, imperfect, messy human complexity, which is also incredibly beautiful and illuminating for why I miss the mark, why I show up more constricted in certain situations, particularly with my children, in relationship to my husband, with our family system, all of that.
It's for me personally, and I guess that some of the others listening in right now have the same association. It's kind of a massive relief that you are bringing into this conversation, relief for parents that you don't have to be this kind of superhuman parent that some of our parents were trying to be and of course failed to be, but their failure, we didn't have any access to the path towards the failure. We only saw the failure and their reaction to their own shortcomings, which, kind of confused us probably. So to make peace with this and to give some transparency to, our own failures and explaining to our children why we did that thing that we now know is wrong and how that happens is kind of a trust building factor that is sometimes ignored, I guess. And it's I think it is a call not only to parents but to us human beings in general to allow access to a more holistic um, to a more holistic concept or a more holistic version of ourselves. So this is the relief I'm feeling, and I really love that. Yeah, we've been talking, or you've mentioned the abundance of parenting advice that is already out there. As a matter of fact, I used to work for a parenting advice website like for almost 10 years. And we were quite frustrated back then because we had a content magazine that contained, as we thought, all the answers. Thank you, Katrin, for joining, and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye. And our frustration was we had a big community where people could, engage in conversations, and they kept on asking the same questions over and over again, where we had like 10 articles about. But the interesting experience for us was obviously it's not enough just to write it down and show it to them, but you need them to engage in conversation and to meet in community in order to kind of, practice this. Thank you. So obviously it's not a question about quantity of advice, of course, and maybe not even only about quality, but also about the way this advice reaches people. And I think we're right in the middle of this vertical and horizontal development idea. Let's make it a bit more personal again. Alice, you already said that you haven't made peace with your failures on full scale, but how has vertical development made a difference in your parenting? How has parenting, and the other way around also is also true, maybe, has parenting impacted your own vertical development, and maybe in what way?
Yeah, it's very interesting. And as I was listening to Val say what it did for her, I was like, yeah, me too. Is this honesty? But I distinctly remember. So when I was about 15 or so, I think was the moment when I really took my parents off the pedestal, and it was a very tall pedestal, and it was a very hard fall for them and for me. So it was a very challenging time. And I had this feeling back then that they were like these aliens who just did not understand my world. And I kept asking myself this question: you've been teenagers too. How is it possible that you've forgotten? Like, who are you? How did you forget? Like, what is this amnesia thing? I was just obsessed with this. So I started this journal back then, which continues to this day. So most of my life, I've kept this journal. I've got some tens of notebooks now of this story. trying to keep the amnesia at bay. So I had this idea, which I think it was a developmental decision now looking in hindsight, to not lose this sense of how am I evolving as a human being and how are my priorities changing? So then by the time I get to 30 or whenever a child comes into my life, I'm able to go back and check in on my 16-year-old self and go, hey, girl, what was important for you back then? So what vertical development did for me, I think, was I was so grateful to my 16-year-old self for making that decision, because I think in a way it put me on the path of what I ended up doing as a profession, because it started a self-reflective practice that really made me always think of why am I doing what I'm doing and what is shifting and what is this relationship working or not working. So it just built that self-reflective muscle, which for me is the core of vertical development. And what it led to me doing now that I'm a mother is really working super hard to tear down the pedestal before it's even built. So we have conversations about, adults don't, my 9-year-old knows exactly this truth. She's under no illusions that we are perfect. She knows that we're messing up. I don't know if this is going to spare me the adolescent pain. I don't think so. But at least, I can say, I've been honest with you. So, there's no pedestal to throw me off of, because really I'm messing up every day. And also something else that it has done for me is that it allows me to be more aware of when my fallback is coming. And I assume for you, Val, is the same from a lot of conversations we've had. So even the fact that I can say, I have very little patience right now. I'm tired. I'm stressed. I'm like, it's not you, it's me. But I know I'm going to react in not a good way. And the fact that I can see it coming and I can say that it's coming. And she says it to me, like, Mom, I'm not having a good day today. That to me is a really huge gift. In the trust we have in just how we're able to navigate the rough patches together as a family, because I have the same kinds of conversations with my husband as well. And it's an incredible gift. Yeah.
Val, you were violently shaking your head when Alice was asking the theoretical question whether adolescence won't be that bad. Because I've been asking myself the same question when my son, who's really, an old verbal framing would be stubborn. And I think you need to revisit these kind of words and emblems from time to time, because you need to know what you're saying and what you're doing to him and to yourself. But it's not a linear path. That's what we already stated, and that's what you stated with the concept of vertical development and the special perspective on particular fallbacks that you've been doing research on. Talking about it's a very adult development is in a way an optimistic and motivating concept, at least to me, because once you realize that you're not done at a certain age, or when you're a so-called grown-up, this can be frustrating in case you didn't like learning in school and developing, but it's a very optimistic cause. But it's not on a linear path, which can make it frustrating, confusing. Can you tell us a little more about managing expectations while we grow as humans? Or what is the underlying helpline that you have for parents who are, want to go on this path, embark on this journey with you? How do we manage our expectations and frustrations? Do you have any idea about that?
Well,
Can I
I think
clarify before we jump into it? What expectations about what? What are you thinking when you're saying, Robert, manage expectations?
Expectations about our own superhuman, challenge. Sometimes we still have these concepts that we relate to, even if we now know that they have been not perfect or even wrong, but sometimes we relate to them. So when we embark on a journey as a growing human, when we embark on this vertical development, how do we manage, setbacks and these fallbacks? Is there any advice that you could give from your experience, from your research? And how did you, embed this into your program, maybe?
Yeah.
Mm.
Thank you. That's a great clarifying question, Alice. And thanks for that, adding that detail to it, Robert. So I think I want to start by saying that when we talk about, I appreciate your bringing fallback into the space of vertical development and kind of having us talk about them in lockstep, because we often think about vertical development as going up, right? And growth and development, like we're getting bigger, right? And I think that that's been challenging in the field, that we assume that it is a path towards sweetness and light as we grow bigger. And that's not always true. I mean, even if we are just growing, growth is painful. And it is these hard, and we see this in our children, right? These edges, these walls sometimes that they bump up against, that, you know, the way that they saw things before, the way things worked for them before doesn't work any longer, but they don't know what's out there. And what's out there is really scary. And I say they, and it applies to us grown-ups, so-called grown-ups as well. Like, we don't know what comes next, but this thing that we've been in doesn't work well anymore. And so you're really pushing into the unknown, and there's a giving up of something along the way. Always there's loss with development, and there's a loss of privileging the gifts at each stage of development, because we're so busy pushing them away so we don't fall back into them, into that way of making meaning, as we're just beginning to start to make meaning in a different way. So even if we're only onward and upward, it's still hard. And I think just knowing that is really helpful. Just having an expectation that I can grow, and it's going to be hard, and I need to opt in for the difficulty of the journey. But the fallback within there is, and sometimes it's the fallback, and sometimes it's just really kind of flowing along the developmental spectrum. We do have access to all of these other ways of making meaning that we've been through before. And we can choicefully opt into those. Like, sometimes there are black and white answers and rules in our house that, you know, need to be maintained. And then there are other times when there's an opportunity for more fluidity and perspective taking, and then there are the times when we just don't have access anymore because we are locked down. We are locked into a smaller, more constricted way of knowing. Alice?
Can I offer an example of what you're saying now?
Yeah.
Maybe I think it's so powerful, and perhaps if we bring it to life with something that just came up for me. We have a few rules in our house around, you know, what are the things that parents have veto rights on? As in, I can say we don't do that. And it's usually health and safety and social responsibility things. As in, you need to brush your teeth. We need to go to the doctors for checkups, even if we don't like that. You need to go to school, all that stuff. You need to dress appropriately for school. That's in the social response. You need to clean your room. But then there are, and that for me is the appropriate use of those earlier stages where, you know, we have clear rules, black or white, kind of right or wrong kind of things. But then there's a lot of dialogue in other areas. And I distinctly remember, like, when my kid was about 3, it hit me how this actually plays out for her. She said, I want to wear my gumboots to school. It was summer, super hot. Like, completely inappropriate weather for gumboots, but she loved her gumboots and she just wanted to wear them. And I was like, no, you can't wear your gumboots. Like, that's crazy. And she's like, Mom, is this health and safety? Is it dangerous for me to wear my gumboots? Like, no, you know, your feet will get sweaty. That's not real health and safety issue. It's like, what's your argument for not letting me wear my gumboots? So 3.5 years old. And she and I just had this moment when I realized I was in my fallback, my diplomat fallback, thinking of the teachers seeing my kid walk in with gumboots on a scorching summer day and thinking, this irresponsible mother, how could she let her? So that was, I just had not realized how much my imposition of a rule was not motivated by, you know, my mature kind of self, but my diminished fallback self thinking they're not going to think I'm a good enough mom. it was not about the kid, it was just about me. So I think when Val talks about the fluidity of the continuum, the appropriateness of that fluidity versus the fallback moments, that is a very small example that actually illustrates it for me. And there are hundreds of these every day.
Yes, that I have too. Absolutely. And so thank you. That's super helpful because that also points to another thing that I think this gives us, which is access to pause and to notice. So it actually had nothing to do with Alice's daughter. It had everything to do with Alice and how she was seen. And it was a challenge to her identity as a good mom who dresses her child appropriately. That was the reason for her imposing the no gumboots in the middle of summer rule. And so
in your research on fallback, threats to our identity is one big trigger for why we fall back when our identity is threatened in some way.
Yeah, and so just being aware of that, and then you ask it's all kind of again the practice and the muscle memory. Well, why am I saying no to this? Like, is this about me or is it about her? And so we get into the practice of being in the inquiry around why am I showing up the way that I am? Challenges to identity is one of the triggers for fallback. Alice noted, I'm tired. I don't have the capacity. Robert, you asked what our energy level was. Maybe we should do that check in with our families. Say, my energy level is 3. Well, this is not the time to have this conversation. No, exactly. So the ordinary triggers of life, just being tired and stressed and hungry. There's also the contextual gravitational pull. So when a system, actually in our family systems have their own kind of developmental capacities. So when our family system pulls us back into a smaller way of being, our family of origin system often does that. There are all sorts of systems that we walk into that we come in one way and then the gravitational pull drags us back. And then also the unresolved traumas from our own growing up, and whether they felt like traumas to us at the time or not, that it's a part of us that never was able to fully develop. And so when we encounter a thing or a person, then we go back into that more constricted space of behaving. So just even having kind of a sense of, well, what is this about? And being able to inquire into it is super helpful.
Thank you so much. I mean, I have many more questions, but before we're opening up this conversation and ask all of our participants, bye, Fabian. Thank you.
Get your gumboots.
Ask their question. Yeah, get your gumboots and go out into the winter, which is pretty appropriate. I just, when Alice, when you were talking about your 16-year-old self that you have kind of access to through the journals you kept, I was thinking about the last session of the Conscious You interview series when Nadia Taranchevsky, the founder of Conscious You and the source of the Conscious You behind the Conscious You, Conscious Tribe community, interviewed Wakanye Hoffman, an AI expert and an expert in many other fields. And I was thinking about, using AI to create an avatar that, represents the persona of our 16-year-old self, for instance, and maybe, addressing this avatar to give us some parenting advice. That could be a great project from time to time. I don't know.
Maybe I can feed all of my journals into ChatGPT.
Absolutely. We have, yeah, great. So we already have a project here, and we could, talk about many other things, and maybe I will ask another question a bit later. But first of all, I would like to give all of you who are listening the opportunity to, ask a question, make a remark. I will try putting you in the spotlight for that time, and then, change that again. Is there any question in the room? Are there any remarks? Anything you would like to ask Alice and Val? Now would be a great time.
Bye, Martha.
Leave.
Come on, people,
While
tell us
people
that you
are,
have challenges too.
no, I was going to say, while people are thinking
How are
about
you showing up with your kids?
yeah, how are you showing
Yeah.
up? One of the things that I was thinking about when Alice talked about her 15-year-old self, and I do a lot of work using a theater metaphor to help us access these different parts of us. So Alice's 15-year-old self, and one of the characters that is in my ensemble is one that I'm rediscovering, which is me when I was younger, me in my teenage years, and I call her Wild. And Wild doesn't show up as she did when she was 16. Wild shows up in an appropriate way for my age and my roles and everything, but is freer, is looser, is more fun. And my children say, when they don't know I'm bringing Wild on the scene, but they'll say, "You're more fun right now." Or if my husband and I we still do love all the 80s and 90s rock hair bands. So we'll go to concerts, and we went to Def Leppard and Steve Miller Band and Journey concert. And I had my like ripped up old concert t-shirt, and I had my black eyeliner and my hair and hot rollers and all that. And I went to pick up my son from school, and he looked at me and he was like,
Whoa, mom.
he was like, "I like this look." He's a high schooler. I don't get that much from him, but he was like, "I like this look." And it did bring me back. I put on the hair and the costume and everything to what that feeling was like, and to being able to connect with my children in that way. And so I do love the idea of how do we access those parts of us that were them at that age.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. And probably it wouldn't be a good idea to tell your children that Well exists, because they might refer to her like, why don't you bring her on at
Right.
certain
I'm sure they
moments?
would.
Like Alice's daughter, referred to the non-negotiable part of the household rules, which I mean, we are negotiating pretty much every day, like rules and exceptions. It's also it's a great field of debate. What is an exception? Because sometimes we make like 5 exceptions in a row because our energy level is 3, and we need this exception to save ourselves, and then we need to explain ourselves because why this was true yesterday and it's
Just too
not true.
tired to enforce this rule right now.
Absolutely. Yeah. There is no rule enforcer awake anymore at this very moment. And when you talked about the non-negotiable parts of your household rules, I was being reminded of also one perspective on, I mean, we have a lot of issues with computer games. I'm sure you have some experience with this too. And I read about the freedom that lies within those computer games for children whose life is, apart from that, pretty regulated. They have rules to obey to all the time and everywhere. And these computer games are um, are such a great world for them sometimes, because the rules are designed for them, and the rules can be bent in a certain way, and they are kind of in charge. And I really like this concept. I haven't been able to adapt it to our everyday life yet with an open world computer game, but we're still learning. Again, looking at the audience, are there any questions, remarks, some stories you would like to share, your challenges? You have two, renowned experts here for adult development and organizational development. Maybe we didn't talk about the transfer yet to organizations, of course. The only transfer that I'm aware of sometimes is that companies talking about themselves being families, which is giving me the creeps sometimes, because I don't think that concept is working with adults. But that's another topic. So when I don't hear anything from you, I would like to ask Val one more thing, because on your website I found a quote where you write, sharing your story. I left my job to attempt to be. And that, of course, resonated. And I suppose leaving your job was not that much of a spontaneous decision only, but also a deliberate one with a ramp and a path. And how successful has this attempt to be so far? And do we all need to quit our jobs to be? Or is there any other way that you can share? And maybe growing humans is one part of the solution.
Yeah. It's a practice to attempt to be. It's a practice to attempt to be in the space of everyday life and demands. And it was then too, but it was easier because I took that part of me off the plate. Maybe I'll just provide a little bit of context for those people. Robert, I'm so impressed at how deeply you dug into our websites and, just to find out about us, to do your research for this. But for those who have not, I was a full-time faculty teaching at a university and a graduate program, a Master's of Science in Org Leadership. And it was a great job. It was a great gig, and it was something that I felt really privileged to have. And at some point, I just was not showing up very well to myself or to my family or to my students or to, like anything in my life. Nothing seemed to be working. And I realized that I had done all of the things that had served me so well to this point in my life, and which was contributing and producing and achieving, and everything looked good on paper, but it just wasn't fulfilling for me anymore. And so I reached this kind of developmental wall that I kind of mentioned before, where I was like, this isn't working for me anymore. And it should, because everything seems perfect, right? And I realized that the way that I found value and worth in myself was no longer, didn't feel right anymore, didn't feel true anymore. And it's because that's how I got loved growing up. This is one of my own like unresolved traumas from my upbringing. I got loved when I did well, when, I was the best, when I achieved. And so that's the story that I lived into. And so I had the incredible privilege of being able to, and it wasn't easy because it was getting like, I shed all the parts of my ego and my identity that were related to me achieving, me, being worthy because I produced something. And this was part of it, to like, can I get rid of all of that and still be loved and still feel worthy? And of course, all of us think, well, yes, that's not what makes you worthy. But it was a real fear for me that I won't be worthy if I'm not doing all the things, if I won't be loved. And so I had the privilege of leaving my job, and it took a year to ramp up to that. And then slowly getting rid of all of the things that fed my ego. And there was a lot of doing that I pretended was being. And then finally I settled into it. And then COVID happened and my children came home, and and I was a homeschool teacher. I'm not a teacher of children. I'm a teacher of adults, and so that kind of unraveled a whole bunch of being, and so it's a practice to stay in the being space, and for me not to get caught up in, again, the achieving and producing and all of that, because I'm good at that. That's how I know I get loved. And I actually think I was a little surprised by your last question about, is growing humans a possibility for the rest of us who can't quit their jobs to just be, and that's the majority of us, right? We can't just stop and test this out. I was incredibly privileged to be able to do this. And that was even with my privilege, but particularly without it, the community of people who can see you. And I mean, I needed to have that community. I needed to have yes, you were worthy just because of who because as a human, you were worthy. I needed that community to hold me, and not the growing humans specifically, but the people who I was in relationship with, and to allow me to see a different way out, I think, of it, a different way of being and holding a truth than I had been able to before. So yes, I do think that anytime we can find those environments that challenge us and tell us, because it's actually having dinner with a friend that I had this epiphany that, wow, this is how I got loved as a child, and this is why, I hold so tightly to this. That allowed me to see something that I couldn't see before. And so to be challenged in our way of making meaning, and also to be held and to be shown a part of us that we can't see on our own, and for who we're becoming, or who we have the potential to become. I think that's incredibly powerful.
What also is incredibly powerful is what you just shared, and I'm very thankful for this, because this is where everything comes together in a way. Because you mentioned the importance of community, and of having a space where we can share our non-superhuman um, parts, where we can share our shortcomings, our fears, where we can show our true selves. And I believe that the Conscious Tribe community has become such a space, and the communities you are building. And sometimes we share, our communities are overlapping, and this is when something special happens. And I'm so grateful for you joining us, and for you sharing your experience and your stories and your positive way of not being perfect. I mean, this is what I meant by relief, and I'm really grateful for that. And I'm also grateful for Cecilia, Andrew, Valerie, Barry, and Susan for still being with us. This is the final opportunity to ask a question, but it's not a threat. You don't have to. We appreciate you being here. And I think if there are no further questions, I think we will close it right here, and make us all a gift of a little bit more time for mornings and afternoons. And I'm sure we will meet again sometime. Thank you very, very much, Alice. Thank you, Val, for coming here, for taking the time, for sharing your expertise and your experience with us. I'm very much looking forward to continuing this conversation somewhere, anywhere, actually. And we have a kind of a closing ritual. I don't know if you're still familiar with it. We're sitting everywhere around the globe, I guess. And let's now try to. I need to unpin us in order to make this properly. As you can see, I can't see with my glasses any longer. This is how old I am. And so now we're all together in one big screen. And maybe you find the person next to you and try to touch this person, over the distance. And then we can say goodbye to each other. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Feel it.
Thank you.
See you next time.
Much
Bye-bye,
appreciated.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.